Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of my GaudiumAtSpace22.com podcast and YouTube video. Today, I'm joined by someone I think I've had on the show two or three times before, Dr. Chris Altieri, who got his PhD at the Gregorian, not that long ago, actually, was it, Chris?
Well, it was a few years ago now.
Yeah, you're seasoned. You're now seasoned.
Yeah, I defended it in 2010, I think.
And you have an expertise in philosophy, theology, politics. You are quite the Renaissance man intellectually. You now teach at Fairfield Prep up in Connecticut, which is your
I'm
alma mater.
I'm not going to argue with any of that, Larry. But just folks, make a note. He said it. I didn't.
And Chris also once worked for Vatican Radio. He still is
Guilty as
like,
charged.
very involved in various Catholic publications like the Catholic Herald, Catholic Road Report. And what we're going to discuss today, he just had an article come out in Crux. You can see it online. Chris, remind me, I had it printed out and I left it downstairs by accident. I don't want to run get it. I went downstairs to get something to drink and left it down there. So what's the name of the article?
Oh, I don't remember what it was called.
It was about Cardinal
Writers
Burke.
don't write. Writers don't write headlines. But
I
the
know,
subject was
unfortunately.
well, sometimes. Look, I'll tell you, having been on both sides of that, having been an editor and a makeup editor or a copy editor, and done it all. But being a makeup editor, or a sub editor, as sometimes they're called, the guys who write the headlines. You can't be great at everything, and I was a pretty terrible
Headline writer.
But
Yeah.
That's an art. So I don't want to short shrift it.
And
That said, the piece you're talking about was just an analysis of the whys and wherefores of the apparent. Don't know how to couch it really still. Let's just call them the measures that Pope Francis is apparently taking or countenancing, at least, against Cardinal Burke. That's Raymond Leo Cardinal Burke, the former prefect of the Apostolic Signatura. Essentially, he was the former Chief Justice of the church's Supreme Court. We can get into the weeds on how the Apostolic Signatura and the Roman Rota split responsibilities for kinds of cases and things like that. But
so he's an important dude. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Former Archbishop of St. Louis.
Yeah.
Had been in lacrosse before. He's a priest of lacrosse, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Canon lawyer, and a very good one.
Yeah.
Who has not been shy about his criticism of certain aspects of Pope Francis's approach to teaching the faith and governing the church.
Yes. To say the least. Yes, he's been very critical, I would say. And so, in other words, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we kind of established Cardinal Burke's bona fides here, who he is. But for the listeners who may not be completely up to speed, what we're talking about are at least at this point what seem to be very well substantiated rumors, at least, that Pope Francis is about to kick Cardinal Burke out of his apartment in Rome, the one that comes with being a cardinal, and to take away his salary as a cardinal in Rome. And it was, in a sense, leaked from a meeting of the heads of the dicasteries that he had. And then Austin Ivory, the great, sort of papal biographer, has now sort of confirmed that the Pope did, in fact, say to him, yes, because Cardinal Burke has harmed the unity of the church, I have decided to move in this direction. But I just read today that Cardinal Burke has said that he himself has not yet been told that this is the case. So that's another issue that we can talk about right there. Assuming that this report is true, why hasn't Cardinal Burke even been had the decency of being told that this is happening to him? So
Yeah.
anyway, go ahead. What's your analysis of all this?
I mean, Larry, it's not a great look,
Right.
to be perfectly frank. You know, and as far as the look, Pope Francis, he's the Pope, and he was well within his rights, and this was way back before any of this kicked off. It was in 2014. He was well within his rights to remove Cardinal Burke from his position at the Signatura. You know, he's stripped him basically of every office of trust and responsibility that he has in the church. He's still on a few congregations, but the fact is that those sorts of positions are, I wouldn't call them sinecures, but they're not curial offices in the pertinent sense of the term. Okay.
Right.
So, you know,
So it's not a good
and
look,
he
but
was,
why
and he
isn't
was,
it a good look? I mean, can't the
yeah.
Pope do whatever the Pope wants?
Well, a little bit of the background here. So for several years, Cardinal Burke has been basically riding the conference circuit, you know, and speaking his
Yeah.
mind, saying his piece, and the Pope has been content to let him do that. And frankly, I thought it was a pretty terrific. And he was winning the PR war simply by ignoring Cardinal Burke.
Yeah.
Right?
Because the more he ignored Cardinal Burke, the more Cardinal Burke just looked like a crazy right winger out there on the fringes waving his arms around, right?
I don't know that he looked that way, but it was certainly easy enough for
To
people to
portray him
paint
that way.
him that way.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yes.
And more importantly, Pope Francis was taking the high road on it, right?
Yeah.
And putting his money where his mouth is, and could say, you know, look, I called for frank talk. Cardinal Burke is speaking frankly. That's his business. That's his right. It's a free country, as it were, right?
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
uh, let him say what he has to say to the people who are willing to turn out and hear it, and we can all get on with our lives. I'm still the Pope, right? He's pulled that rug out from under himself.
Yeah.
At this point. And why? What's the practical upside? I don't see it. You know, it's not even like a case of of Joe Strickland, and I got into this a little bit in the piece you're talking about.
Yeah, I want to tell you because you compared the two situations and you say they're not symmetrical. They're not the same.
It's not at all apples to apples here, because Strickland had care of souls, and Strickland, you know, like him or not, agree with him on some points. You can say what you know, have your take on Joe Strickland. He was not merely strident. He was very free and easy with his personal attacks on the Pope. You know, he went after the person of the Holy Father in a way that Cardinal Burke not only hasn't done, but wouldn't sit still for, you know. And so he's always conducted himself after the manner of the loyal opposition, as it were, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If we could imagine it in roughly parliamentary terms.
So what do you think, though, was the provocation? What was the straw that broke the camel's back in this regard that would cause the Pope allegedly to take this, what seems on the surface to be a very petty move? It's like, I'm going to take the keys to your apartment away and your salary.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not. Exactly what the measures are still isn't clear. So I wouldn't I wouldn't go all the way in on that and accept, I wouldn't give as good the worst possible or the strongest possible reading of the measures just yet. But there's confirmation, unless Austin Ivory, the papal biographer that you mentioned earlier, who whatever else you might say or think, has had access to the Pope
Yeah.
over the years. Unless he's making it up.
Well, I know people that know Austin Ivory.
Francis.
I've never met Austin Ivory, but I know people who do know him. We say he's a thoroughly likable human being and a man of deep integrity. I don't agree with his papalatry or whatever you want to call it with regard to Pope Francis, but he's not. I don't think he's a liar. I don't think he would confabulate and just make this up.
Neither do I. Which is the point, right?
Yeah.
So some measures are being countenanced. The Pope has decided on some measures that are within the ballpark of what's been reported, which is, I'm not sure I would say that there's an eviction per se. But yeah, basically,
Yeah.
removing his, interfering in his present housing arrangements or domiciling in Rome, and at the very least withdrawing his his living stipend, right? Which Cardinals resident in the city get. The best I could do is maybe, he's sort of declaring him persona non grata, right?
Well, that seems to be it, because obviously the Pope knows that Cardinal Burke could easily find another apartment in Rome, and Burke has said that he's going to just find another apartment in Rome, and he's got access to people that will give him money, I'm sure, to live on if he doesn't have enough money already. So I think this is simply, as you said,
Yeah,
the Pope signaling you are persona non grata. You are not welcome in the papal court.
The Pope says he's doing it because he believes that that Cardinal Burke has used the means that the Apostolic See has put at his disposal to work against the unity of the church. That's what the Pope says, or that's what Ivory says the Pope says. And I don't see any reason not to take it as good.
I don't see it.
I don't see it, but I'm not the Pope.
Well, here's why I don't. This is why I'm dubious about this. Okay, why I think there might be at least a hint here or an indication here of a certain pettiness, maybe even a certain vindictiveness. Once again, I'm reading motives into the Pope. He may not have, and he is the Pope, and I owe him a certain respect. But nevertheless, one has to wonder if Cardinal Burkes Digs at Pope Francis's papacy didn't get under his skin, because the fact is there are other cardinals, such as a Cardinal Hollerich or other bishops like Bishop Batzing in Germany, who have harmed the unity of the church most directly by dissenting from definitive and authoritative church teaching, and are now seeking, for example, through the German Synodal Weg, to actually reconstitute the apostolic structure of the church in many ways. And yet those guys get a pass. And yet they are definitely harming the unity of the church, at least from my perspective. But what they refrain from doing is sniping at the Pope or sniping at his processes and his beloved sacred cow. So I wonder maybe too if one of the last straws wasn't the fact that at the Synod on Synodality in October, Cardinal Burke spoke at a sort of counter synod little meeting that was sponsored by people like LifeSite News. I can't remember the name of the meeting. Oh, the Babel, Synodal Babel or something like that. And yeah. Cardinal Burke spoke at that. And I'm just wondering if that maybe wasn't the final straw.
I don't know. I know that two rounds of dubia that Cardinal Burke submitted, got answers to the first set, didn't like the answers, so
Right.
reformulated the questions, resubmitted them, and published the questions without making mention of the round of answers,
Yeah.
except to say what we got answers, but the Pope answered us privately, so we're not publishing them. And then Pope Francis ordered the publication of those answers, right? So we all had a field day with that in the
And that
press,
all happened right before the Synod on
and that
Synodality,
was right before the synod. Yeah.
which only increased the seriousness of what was coming down. I don't know what you think, Chris, but I actually think it was poor form on the part of the Dubia Cardinals to publish the questions without, in a sense, even acknowledging that the Pope had responded and that they just didn't like his response. Or did
I
they?
don't. Yeah, I don't recall that they didn't acknowledge that he'd responded. I think they made that clear, but didn't publish
Okay. I'm wrong
the
about that then. Okay, go ahead.
the answers. Yeah, it still wasn't a great look. You asked
No,
your questions. You asked your questions. You got answers. You don't have to like the answers, but you got them.
right.
Um.
And when Cardinals, and in theory, when Cardinals propose to the Pope some dubia, it's to help the Cardinals themselves clarify in their minds what the Pope is saying in order to better advise and counsel the Pope. It's not a case where dubia traditionally are, well, we're going to ask you a bunch of questions and we're going to make it all public. So that the whole world can see what it is that we're talking. Am I right about that?
Yes. Now, I wouldn't mind seeing, and I think I wrote about this recently too, because we have seen a bunch of responsa ad dubia, responses to dubia, published recently, and it wouldn't bother me very much. In fact, I'd very much enjoy seeing the standard operating procedure changed, so that
Right.
what you do is you do publish responses when you decide to give them, and you don't have to put out a press release or have a news item on Vatican News every time, right?
Yeah.
But there'll be a place where people who are interested can go and look up answers to dubia that have been asked.
Okay. Okay. So
And
go
so
ahead.
it's in the interests of transparency. Um, that said, it's not the standard operating procedure right now. Most dubia, as a matter of fact, aren't for the Pope. And even when they are for the Pope, it's very rarely the Pope who actually answers them. It goes to a dicastery, and the dicastery gives it to a flunky, and the flunky goes to the library. Maybe comes back and asks the question of his head man, what do I do
Yeah.
with this? What do I tell Bishop so and so? Or Father so and so is asking this. Well, tell him this. Um,
Yeah.
depending on the importance of the question, the kind of question it is it a discipline question, is it a doctrine question, how serious, all of this, it's very, very bureaucratic and run of the mill, and there's a lot of rigmarole. People have the idea of the curia being this place, it's like a Renaissance vignette. It's just a bunch of guys with office jobs. They're pencil pushers, Larry.
Yeah.
And I don't say that to degrade or denigrate the work that they do. It's to make it clear that this is very often very boring, very tedious work, as necessary as it is. The reason they do it is because somebody's gotta, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and these are dedicated experts. These are people who
Right.
have, who have a tough job to do.
So,
No, it's not, and it's most days it isn't a whole lot of fun.
all right. So then, okay. So that's kind of how the dubia are usually handled and what the standard operating procedure usually is. You think there should be more transparency. And I think that is something that this Pope is called for. I wish he would actually do it. He's always talking about transparency, and rarely is this papacy transparent about anything.
Yeah,
Whether
that's a problem,
and so perhaps the dubia cardinals, even if it's a poor look, and even if the optics aren't good, and even if they're in a sense violating standard protocol, maybe this is just a kind of expression of not only their exasperation, but an exasperation of an entire wing of the church that they sort of theologically represent, that is looking to the Holy Father and saying, look, the role of the Petrine ministry is to unify by clarifying. And yet you routinely muddy the waters. And then once you've muddied the waters, back away and don't clarify. And then there's a huge mess. And then you get accused of heresy by various people. And then you react by squashing them like bugs and so on. It's just not a good dynamic. And so to me, the dubia kind of represented just this exasperation with this entire pontificate and its lack of transparency and the manner in which it operates.
Well, you talked about we talked about Joe Strickland. The thing that I mentioned at the end of the piece that you're talking about there, the comparison that I don't think that the Pope wants anyone to be making, but has made it impossible to avoid, isn't to people like Hollerich that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Cardinal Hollerich or Bishop Batzing, or guys like that, who, all right, so they're, Hollerich is the Pope's guy. And that's fine. He's the Pope and he gets to have his guys. I don't have to like it,
Yeah.
he's the Pope. And
but the question would be, why is he the Pope's guy?
I think I said to you the last time about the Germans. It was something along the lines of, I mean, the Germans have been causing trouble for civilization since the Teutoburg Forest,
Yeah. 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 And they've been
German bishops.
They've been a thorn in Rome. Been a thorn in Rome's side going back 2,000 years. Yeah.
Talk about a dog bites man story, Larry. But it's guys like Jean-Pierre Ricard in France, the art, somehow emeritus Archbishop of Bordeaux, who still has his red hat. The man is confessed to child molestation.
Yes. You mentioned that in the article, and I thought that was a great point. And it just goes to the point of that is raised over and over again of a double standard at play. Regardless of what one thinks of Cardinal Burke, is there not a double standard? That's what I think so many people want to know.
How is that guy, that guy gets to keep his red hat? And, all right, so Burke doesn't lose his red hat, but he's what? He's not allowed to live in the city anymore, or he's not welcome, he's what gives is a reasonable question at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's a reasonable, I don't think it's an impertinent question to ask. I think it's a reasonable question to ask. And this is part of your article. Your latest article is, I think, part and parcel of an ongoing series of articles that you, and I read every one of yours and share the ones I see over the past 2 or 3 years, where you keep hammering away over and over and over again, not on the sort of doctrinal issues, or is the Pope a heretic? Is he not a heretic? I don't think he's a heretic, and I say this all the time. I am more concerned, I think, though, with the theology underlying all of this than you are. You've been hammering away at, in a sense, the erosion of the rule of law in the church under this pontificate, it seems to me.
Yeah, so and you and I, we've gone back and forth about it. And I was glad of a chance a while back to clarify with you that it's not that I think that the theology is unimportant.
Right.
All
Maybe
right.
I overstated that. It's just a different emphasis
Uh,
you and I have. You
but
know,
I would say, yeah, and I'll put it this way bluntly. Doctrine has a way of taking care of itself.
yeah,
This isn't the first mess we've been in doctrinally. Now, do we have to go and, wake sleeping dogs? I don't see the upside to it. I don't, but it is what it is, and but things will clear up. It it may take a while, but the church is an institution that thinks in centuries, right?
yes,
But the church is an institution, which means that she needs to govern herself in real time. And it is, as a journalist, as a reporter, and as an observer and analyst of things that happen in the church at the highest levels of governance, especially of government, especially, it is with the Pope as a governor that I am chiefly concerned. And I don't mind saying I don't think he's governed well.
yeah.
And
But wouldn't you say?
especially,
Let me stop you real quick there, and it might. I don't want to take us off too far on a tangent. But would you not also say, because I would say this, that the previous two popes also did not govern well?
oh, sure. Uh, you know,
But the not governing well was of a different kind for each one of the popes, probably.
I think, sure. And we could get into the weeds on that, right?
Yeah.
Um, both John Paul II and Benedict XVI delegated a lot. John
Yes.
Paul II, because he spent a lot of time traveling, and then was sick for a long time, and
Yeah.
we forget, especially now with the series of health scares including the current one that Pope Francis is having. We forget that Pope St. John Paul II, while he lived and reigned, was real sick for a real long time.
About 10 years, about 10
Yeah.
years of his papacy. Yeah.
Where he was, not running the church day to day
No, not at all.
in any meaningful sense. And Benedict always admitted, in fact, he talked about it quite frankly and openly in his memoir that was published in 1993, I think. Certainly the English edition came out in 1993 or thereabouts. It was called Milestones, if you
Yeah.
recall. He's,
I have it. It's on
I've
my shelf
always,
back
I've
here.
always
Yeah.
been, I've always been a weak administrator, is what he says in
Yeah.
there. And that's a fair assessment. All right.
Well, where does
Uh,
Francis differ? How is Francis's poor governance of the church maybe in some ways worse? I would deem it worse. I would view
I
the
don't,
poor governance of the previous two popes as one of just lack of attention, whereas this pope seems to rule by diktat and to, in a sense, overturn long established canonical processes.
he is not concerned with figuring out why things have been done the way they've been done. I think is certainly true. Um, and he has, as a matter of fact, yes, ruled by diktat. Um, governed by fiat. Uh, run roughshod over due process,
Yeah.
rule of law, all of these things. Um, and you know, made some, not perfect, but potentially very useful papal reforms, and then has been very, very reticent to use them. I think, especially of Vos Estis Lux Mundi,
I was going to
the
bring that up.
form,
Yeah.
of which streamlined the investigation process and the prosecution of abuse and cover up in the church. But it's been pretty sparing in his use of that tool that he gave himself. And if you're not going to take it out of the toolbox and use it, I don't know what good it is. He's given friends a pass. I don't know
Yeah.
how else to describe the way that he handled the case of Bishop Gustavo Zanqueta as anything except, protecting a friend.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and more
Or
recently,
Rupnik.
Marco Rupnik. Yeah, they the rehabilitation of Cardinal Godfrey Daniels, right?
I would add in the
Well,
rehabilitation of Cardinal McCarrick.
rehabilitate. I don't know. That's the one he maybe got halfway right. Certainly, I think it's fair to point out that uh, he hasn't given the U.S. bishops any encouragement or the wherewithal to dig up the network, uh, the McCarrick network, right?
Right.
Um,
Well, he's promoted certain people who were part of the McCarrick network.
sure. And it does, Cardinal Kevin Farrell
Yeah.
is one that comes to mind. And you sort of, you wonder what that's about, don't you? You
Yeah,
know,
you do. And of course,
and
there's
you
6 degrees of separation for almost half of the American episcopacy.
yeah,
And Cardinal McCarrick.
and there are other things that and that's just one country,
Yeah.
um
Well, the point
there have
being,
been other places that have had other and similar situations
yeah.
emerge.
But see,
um
the
and
point is
go ahead.
no, to bring it back to the Burke situation, maybe even Strickland to an extent, is there's just this perception of kind of almost arbitrariness, so that it's whatever mood the Pope woke up in that morning, and that's a caricature and it's not true. But I'm talking about on the level of perception as you try to connect certain dots and try to figure out, well, what kind of criteria is he using here for making these adjudications. It just that there's just all of these gaps, and you look at it and you wonder. And so to me, then that raises a theological question that I want to address to you, which is, it, in some ways, it seems to me that the signature effort of this Pope, for better or for worse, and I've been critical of it, is this synod on synodality, this whole synodality concept, which is so ill-defined. But let's just take it as something decent and good and not put a pejorative spin on it and say, okay, what he wants is a decentralized church where there's not so much emphasis on papal rule, and authority is diffused out to the bishops as per Vatican II and collegiality and so on. But then you turn around and act in very non-synodal ways. How does the synodal process have any credibility at all in a papacy that acts in such unilateral, monarchical, non-synodal ways?
Well, that's a tougher question to answer than you might think, in part because it brings us to the nexus of, if you will, theology and politics, right? And by
Right.
politics here, I don't mean who's up and who's down, who's in and who's out, but the things of the city that is the church. Um, in the East, the synod is an organ of government, right?
Right.
And has been for many, 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 many centuries. Pope Francis has said that the universal church needs to recover and appropriate something of that Eastern genius. But there's very little in what he has set up
Yeah.
that even remotely resembles the organ of government that is the synod in the East.
Yeah.
And there are all sorts of historical contingent reasons for that, and all sorts of historical contingent reasons for which I don't think it could possibly work in the West or as a universal modus gubernandi. That said, well, part of it is just, his speech back to the synod in 2014 or 2015. I can't remember which of the two gatherings it was, but he made it very clear that the synod, as constituted it, which is basically a reform and a revision of what Pope St. Paul VI instituted as a consultative body in the wake of the Second Vatican Council,
Right.
works cum Petro et sub Petro,
Subpetro.
right? So with Peter and under Peter. And he made it very clear that the more important of those two is under Peter, right?
Yes.
So you can't be, the only way to be cum Petro is to be sub
Sub.
Petro.
Yes.
Right? So okay, fine. Well, that means that synodality is going to be whatever Pope Francis says it is.
Right.
And, you know, uh, synodality as a term will mean whatever Pope Francis says it means. That's not helpful.
No, it's not synodal either.
Whatever that means.
Well, in the Greek sense, I mean, in the Eastern sense,
no, it's not. It just it isn't. Okay. And there's no way to square that circle. Okay. Now that's not to say that the effort isn't worthwhile. It's not to say that the thing is good or bad, but it isn't the thing you say it is.
That's right.
Right. And my concern as an observer, as a journalist, as a thinker, and as a Catholic, I don't have a set of concerns that are different, right? As an observer or as a political philosopher, right? The concerns of the philosopher regarding the city are the same as any citizen, as any citizen's concerns, right?
Right. Right. Right.
The same is true here, mutatis mutandis. And I don't see that this is a any sort of system or way toward a system of
Right.
governing the things of the church.
But which, okay, so calls into question whether or not the goal in all of this really is a restructuring in a systematic and coherent way of the way in which the Catholic Church, in a sense, governs itself. And whether, and I mean, and that opens the question by those critics, such as myself, of the whole synodal process, that it's you get this from other people, George Weigel and so forth, that it's a stalking horse for something else. And then you look at the people he's put in charge of it and made voting members of it. And that adds to a deeper level of suspicion that it's a stalking horse for something else. And so that question of what that something else might be is a theological question, I think. And once again, though, at the intersection of church and politics and the unresolved open wound of all the post conciliar debates within Catholicism about this and that and the other thing. And you actually saw synod participants who were speaking of it as like a mini Vatican III and hoping that, you saw, for example, National Catholic Reporter, when the synod was over and looking at the final document and lamenting the fact nothing was done. Gays still can't get married. Women are still not priests. Whatever was this synod even for if it didn't give us all these things? So in my mind, therefore, the question here of once again is one of consistency, and consistency in governance with regard to how one deposes bishops or takes privileges away from cardinals, consistency in what it is that the Pope is actually looking for out of this synod. One day he says it's Eastern this, and the next day it's just listening and moving where the Spirit moves. So there's just this broad incoherence, it seems to me.
Let me put on my antagonist's cap for a minute, Larry.
Sure, go ahead.
Take the other side of this, all right? Just for fun, just for giggles, you and I, huh?
All
All
right.
right.
I hate my headpiece is giving me trouble today. It won't stay in. Okay, go ahead.
And let me ask you the question. All right. Um, what's wrong with letting people talk?
Nothing. As long
You
as it's
know?
letting all voices talk and it's not a curated talking and a curated listening.
Okay, fair enough. Um,
Like, okay, so James
what if
Martin
you
is a voting member of the synod. Hollerich runs the synod. He gives a private audience to Sister Gramick. Where were the members of Courage? Why wasn't anybody from Courage invited to be a voting member of the synod? That's what I mean by curated listening.
all reasonable questions? Uh the Pope's suppose it's like this. The Pope lets these guys have their day in the sun. Then he's the one who turns around and writes the
Yeah.
post exhortation, right? And he tells them what they thought all along. And uh the folks who have been hemming and hawing look silly because they've been screaming Chicken Little, sky has fallen the whole time and nothing happens. Of
Yeah.
all of the horrible doomsaying, right? None of it comes true. And the other guys, the Pirandellos of the world, who want to say that nothing is stable and nothing abides, and we got to get with the times, and the folks who are out for to usher in the age of Aquarius leave disappointed as well because they didn't get what they want. And
This is the great. Let's stop. This is the great.
that's
Okay.
that for me is the least troublesome aspect, if I've got to be perfectly frank, of all of this,
Okay. But
because after when the Amazonian Synod happened, that's pretty much what happened, isn't it?
oh, big time what happened. And here's the thing
Right on
about
the
that.
even on the things where there could have been some movement, right?
like
Like
ordaining.
on ordaining viri probati.
Yeah, ordaining married men in provisional circumstances. And I've said this all along. Okay, so this to me, I don't against the traditionalists and all of these harping critics of this papacy. This Pope is not a heretic. He is simply, if you think this Pope is a heretic, your bar for heresy is very, very, very low, in my opinion. Okay, he's not a heretic, and quite frankly, he's a deeply complicated figure that is not easily pigeonholed. Okay, so there's this synod on synodality thing, and he freights it full of these, lards it with all of these more progressive,
front loads it with yeah,
with all this. Okay. And he did the same thing with the Amazonian Synod, where it was a bunch of fat German prelates running around hoping that they could impose Germanic values on the Amazon and get something out of it for themselves in
they could
return.
use the Amazonian basin as a testing ground for their pet sociological theories, is what it
exactly.
was.
Right. Okay. And then the Pope comes out and it's a big nothing burger. So the point is this. All right, here you've got a Pope. The hard right wingers think he's this wild progressive, and yet he hasn't changed the teaching on contraception. He has not changed the language of the catechism on homosexuality as intrinsically disordered. Despite an ambiguous footnote in Amoris Laetitia, he simply hasn't green-lighted divorce and remarriage a la the Orthodox and following their model. He hasn't green-lighted intercommunion with Protestants. He hasn't okayed gay marriage and this guy. He hasn't ordaining women. He hasn't even done something that he could have easily done with a stroke of a pen, which has allowed priests to get married in certain limited circumstances. So it's really, really hard to paint this Pope as this wild-eyed progressive liberal in an unreconstructed post-Vatican II sense when you look at all that. So then that leads to the question, what was the point to the synod at all? There's all this curated listening. I think the listening was bogus and fraudulent. I think the entire thing was staged and weirdly implemented. And so why not have a synod on liturgy, which is a really important issue that's burning in the church right now, or a liturgy on something else, that is really a burning issue in the church, but a synod on synod, a meeting on meetings, that's actually probably not going to go anywhere. That's going to be a big nothing burger at the. What was Chris? I'm fulminating now. I'm steaming. What was the point to all of this? What was the point? What is going to be the end product of all of this?
I don't know. Maybe what we're dealing with is, the Seinfeld papacy. You guys know the old line, it's a show about nothing, right?
Yeah, a show about nothing.
The stepping back from that, and that was a solid rant, by the way, let me say.
Yeah, I'm capable of them.
The thing is this, all right. I don't know that it needs to have a point beyond the exercise itself.
Right.
Okay. We've heard from the beginning that, Francis is a guy who likes to start processes and then just see where they go. Okay. But that to me is another way of saying, he doesn't actually, ever really conclude anything, doesn't get it done.
Right.
And doesn't care to. There's a lot of evidence to suggest, most of it, precisely the stuff that you've adduced here, to suggest that that is the case. And if it is, okay, fine. When it's just going to mean a lot of cleanup for the next guy and the guy after him, and we're going to be sweeping and dusting and mopping for a while. We were going to be sweeping and dusting and mopping for a while anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
no,
You know, I,
no really big deal. Um, what I do think is interesting in all of this, right? And here, getting back to the point about this being the nexus between theology and politics, is a serious, sustained, consecutive, systematic think through, public think through, a conversation, as it were, right? A debate, a discussion in the church about how power is organized and how to reform the organs by and through which power is exercised in the church, you know, is no longer avoidable, and we can't postpone it for very much longer.
right.
We're going to have to figure out how to constitute new, or to erect new power structures that don't go foul of the church's hierarchical constitution.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
are roundtable meetings and listening sessions going to be utterly useless in that? I don't think so. Right. So,
Right. So what you're saying is
as a
that it
beta
is,
test or a trial run, or as an exercise in methodological research and development
that's
uh,
all.
of
Yeah.
an
Okay.
organon that is going to be useful later on. Maybe this whole thing isn't an absolute waste of time.
I think
Uh,
it is. I think
you
it is.
know,
I think there are better ways.
yeah,
I think there are better ways to restructure the church's governing structure than to
oh,
go through this horrifically Byzantine process that we've been through over the past couple of years. I mean, for example, too, if the process is simply about listening, so I mean, come on. Did you do the penance that I did and several others did? The absolute penance of reading the Instrumentum Laboris for from cover to cover for the Synod on Synod. Did you read that god awful thing, that gobbledygook of
this last
socio?
one, I'm pretty
Not the
sure.
final product, the
Yeah,
Instrumentum Laboris to the Synod on Synodality that came out. You know,
yeah, yeah.
it read like something from a stupid corporation human resources department on dialogue and how do we get along, and there was nothing about Christ, redemption, the sacraments, sanctification, all of the traditional. In other words, you would think that those are the bulwark foundations upon which any change in governing structure of the church would be grounded. And therefore, you would think that those are the things you would want people specifically to be talking about in their listening sessions, and not whatever bullshit idea just popped into their head that day about gay marriage or women priests. All right. Let's talk about serious things. And that the Instrumental Laboris did not direct us towards serious things. And the Synod on Synodality did not direct us towards serious things. So if it's just if the exercise was simply about listening, I still say it was an empty form of listening.
I don't have any problem with that. I'm talking about the process as such, and not this particular specific iteration of it.
Right.
That said, I think it's reasonable to note that uh, the, an instrumentum laboris is always a grab bag. It's a catch-all. It's uh everybody gets a line in it, just so that you can say you didn't leave anybody out. They're awful documents. They're supposed to be awful documents. uh this one this one
This
was I'll grant you this one was particularly egregious, even by that very, that abysmal standard. Uh, that said,
So it was a bad example of a bad genre.
of
So
a
yeah,
bad genre, right? Yeah, or the paradigmatic
yeah,
example
okay, right.
of
Yeah, this
of
will
the
now the
worst
template for
genre.
all really bad instrumental laborious's in the future. That's good. Well, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you either. I mean, I'm just grasping at straws here, trying to figure this Pope out at the what is clearly, the probably the waning years of his papacy. What was this all about? I mean, I was in Rome for half the synod, reported on it, talked to people that were involved in it, and there was some discontent amongst the people that I spoke to about how things were freighted in a certain direction, things were curated in a certain direction, and the instrumentum laboris.
Well,
So in other words, I'm
let me
still left with a deep suspicion that the thing was at least in the eyes of some people, not necessarily the Pope, but in the eyes of some important people in Rome and elsewhere, that the synod was a stalking horse for something else, and that was
I
a
get
change in church doctrine on LGBTQ issues, women's issues, and so on. That's what I think it was.
I get it. I don't want to gainsay that take. All right. Here's the thing, and I don't want to shrink anybody's head, right? Least of all the popes. But I think there is an important psychological element to either everyone's frustrations, whether it's frustrated hopes or consternation over what it looked like the thing was about at the end of the day, right?
Right.
And how the people who were in charge went about it. Synods have always been, for since the first ones in the 60s, right? Since Paul VI reconstituted the body, uh they've always been highly managed affairs. All right.
Oh,
They've been
probably
managed,
maybe even more so in the past.
right? Um, managed and curated.
Oh yeah, they've all been that, and
What
so this one was no
the
different.
and that's the point, right? That
But no, it's
we've been
not, because
promised,
this one
we've been
pretended not to be micromanaged.
that's the promise is we're going to get something different, we're going to get something better.
Yeah.
This time it's going to be, really genuinely open and all of these things, and then it wasn't. It was
Like all of John Paul's synods, I mean, the bishops were given little pamphlets. Everything was here pre-checked for your convenience. Pre-checked and approval for everything I've just said as Pope for your convenience. Now let's talk about everything that I've just agreed that you're going to agree upon. Yeah, I think there's a great deal more brutal honesty in that kind of a charade than there was in the current synod, which at least pretended that it was this open-ended discussion and dialogue when it in fact was not. But I want to come back. I don't want this to devolve into yet another diatribe of mine about the synod. I want to bring it back to Cardinal Burke, which is what I really wanted to talk to you about, which is that at the end of the day, I don't think doing what apparently is being done to Cardinal Burke, and I would extend this maybe, I don't know, I have to think about it more, to Bishop Strickland, that in a church that right now is so racked with competing voices, it's a fractious church right now, at least on some level, and it would seem to me now is a time for a great latitudinarian expression of views, and for allowing for people who are frustrated with the church right now and its direction to voice those views without fear. It seems to me that right now there's got to be in the episcopacy a climate of fear. And that to me is a very bad thing to have in the church, is a climate. Do you think there's a climate of fear? Do you think that this move now against Cardinal Burke, on top of other moves against other bishops, Do you think it creates a climate of fear?
Larry, yes, I do. Um, put yourself in their shoes. Wouldn't you be wondering who's next?
Yes, I would. That's why I asked the question.
You know,
Somebody said in my com box the other day, what if the Pope started coming against you lay folk theologian blowhards on your little YouTube channels and started threatening you with excommunication or something? How would you feel? And I was, well, I wouldn't feel very good about it at all, to be honest with you. I've left you dumbstruck, it seems.
yeah, I mean, look, dumbstruck. Oh, not for long, chap.
No,
Uh,
you were never dumbstruck, Chris. Never.
sorry, I was eyeing my cell phone here is what was happening. My daughter was writing me a message. Um, the thing is this, all
I do
right.
the same. Here's mine right here. Yeah.
Uh, nobody in Rome has been having a very easy time of it,
Right.
right?
That's the
Uh,
word I hear. Yeah.
for a good while now, and that's true of you know curial lifers who are just guys who are office pukes who go into work and do a job and go home at the end of the day. And it's true of the big wigs who don't want to step on toes, get on the boss's bad side, and they're never sure where his good side is on any one day, you know. Um, and folks are very reticent to speak even on background for fear of having things that they may say get traced back to them. uh it's not a happy or terribly healthy climate, and I don't see a move like this making it better, right? um one of the things that I would say in terms of the general reform of the Roman Curia that the Pope has accomplished, at least on paper, right, with Predicate Evangelium, which is one of the signature reforms of his whole pontificate. It wasn't to put the Curia in form for action in the 21st century, because it didn't do that. uh it's perpetuated gridlock. It's sort of the institutionalized and sort of is a recipe for stabilizing the dysfunction, not for fixing it. Even the idea that making evangelization job one for the Curia sounds great until you think about what it actually means on a practical level. Because the Curia is a bureaucracy. That's what it is. It's a power structure. It does things. And like any bureaucracy, it does them at best tolerably well on a good day.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you make evangelization job one for the Curia, you don't make the Curia mission effective. You bureaucratize
Evangelization.
the church's mission of evangelization. That's what
Yeah.
you do.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you hamstrung the actual efficient aspects of the bureaucracy that you really need.
Yeah.
You need the bureaucracy to be bureaucratic in a very efficient way, and theologizing it in this vague missional way doesn't help that.
So now we've got a bunch of super dicasteries where nobody knows exactly what anybody's supposed to be doing on any given day. And you've got, the Congregation for Divine Worship trying to tell people, pastors of parishes what they can and can't put in their bulletins in terms of their mass offerings.
Yeah.
That's psychotic, Larry.
Yeah.
That's
It's
psychotic.
not, nor is it synodal. Regardless of what definition of synodality you give, telling pastors what mass times they can and can't publish in their parish bulletins from an office in Rome is about as top-down psychotic, heavy-handed autocratic rule as you can get.
Yeah, who do they have to enforce that?
That's they've got
Howard, what are
their
we gonna
moles,
do?
their rats that are out
Yeah,
there.
the
Hey,
secret
taking
CDW police
anybody
taking
can take
screenshots of
a screenshot now. Yeah. Hey, take a look at this guy. What he's done
he
in
has the
dog.
Latin Mass published in his bulletin.
That's right. Yes. Yes, here we go. This guy's he's got this mass published in St. Torquemada, Nebraska. There you go.
Saint Torquemada.
Yeah, well, that just popped into my head. But anyway,
that turns
yeah.
up in copy. I'll give you credit for it. Don't worry.
Yeah, so we're kind of sort of a little bit all over the place here at the end, but that's fine. I love it when conversations kind of just go on their own weight in certain directions, and but there is an Ariadne's thread that's sort of running through all of this, which is the governance of the church under Pope Francis, and whether or not some of these recent moves of his against bishops and in this case against a cardinal, whether these are ill-advised moves or long delayed moves that should have been done 5 years ago, according to sort of like where Peter is and Mike Lewis, that kind of thing. Long delay. I mean, according to Mike Lewis and where Peter is, I mean, Cardinal Burke is a heretic that should have been excommunicated 5 years ago or something. It's there's this just sort of insane conversation, it seems to be, going on in the church right now about these things, and moves like this just don't seem to help that.
Yeah, no beef with that. The look, we've had silly seasons before. I think one of the reasons that is frustrating for people is that we thought we were just out of one, right?
Yes, I say this all the time. I don't feel like relitigating the case that we thought was done. We thought double jeopardy applied, and here we are relitigating all of these same stupid, silly season debates all over again. That boils me. I have to tell you, people notice it too. It gets under my skin because, that was litigated by the previous two pontificates, and yet here we are again. Same stupid debates.
Meanwhile, real issues of governance go unaddressed.
Yes.
And the church's credibility is at stake here. Because
yeah,
if people can't believe you when you tell them that, yes, we've published the full and complete and exhaustive list, as far as we know it, of abusers, clerical abusers,
right,
then they can't believe you when you tell them that Jesus loves you and died for your sins and rose from the dead.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And it's that simple.
Yes, okay? It is. Yes, it is. A church that enables child rapists is not a church that can preach the gospel credibly, period.
And a
Full
church
stop.
that tolerates abuse of all kinds against adults
Yes.
is not trustworthy.
Yes.
So let's deal with that.
Well, we could have used a synod
Let's
on that.
face it, squarely and without stint, right?
Yeah, why don't we have a bunch of listening
Francis,
sessions before next year? Listening sessions devoted to one question: clerical or not even just sexual abuse within the church against children and against adults. Let's talk about that, and then let's make the next synod next October with laser-like specificity, zero in on that issue, and let lay people speak and vent their rage and see what happens.
people ask me, I've been tempted to put it this way, that, what do you think about Cardinal Burke? What do you think about X? What do you think about Y? What do you think about Z? Whatever it is, whether it's the synod on synodality, the meeting on meetings, the
Yeah.
who's up, who's down in Rome. The only question I have is, who knew what about Rupnik and when?
Right.
That's what I want to know.
Right.
I want to know what the hell happened and didn't. That's all. Because
or who lifted Rupnik's excommunication?
any one of those things,
Who lifted that? Isn't it only the Pope that can lift that excommunication? I don't know. That's a real question. I don't know the answer to that.
If he expressed repentance, right?
Right.
And an excommunication, whatever else it is a medicinal penalty, it would have to be lifted in very short order. All right. So he pinky swears he's sorry, and the paperwork needs to be filed post haste. I don't know whether that goes to CDF. If it's something in the internal form, it goes to the apostolic penitentiary, but I don't think that would have been the case here. Now, don't quote me on that. I'll check with the resident canon lawyer and get back to you. All right, that's Mrs. Altieri.
Yeah. Well, yes, I kind of figured that. And Esther, yeah, and
I'm sure I asked her that question at the time. I just don't remember the answer.
So then the next question, okay, we kind of have to wrap this up, but the next question after that one, who lifted the excommunication, would be why wasn't, even after the excommunication was lifted, given the severity of the crimes, why wasn't he immediately laicized?
Well, that would have required either a criminal or an administrative process in the ordinary course of things, if it was for the things of which he was accused.
No, it could have been just the Pope signing a piece of paper. The Pope, after all, remember, can do whatever the hell the Pope wants. And if the Pope looked at Rupnik's case and said, no way this man should be a priest. In other words, this is my point. If you or I were sitting at that desk looking at Father Rupnik, we would say, you have said your last mass, Father. Don't let the door hit your ass on the way out. You're not a priest anymore. And I would have signed that document and sent him packing. That's what I would have done. I think that's what you would have done.
I'm not sure that I wouldn't have made, I'm not sure that I wouldn't have made him stand trial and made it public, not because I think that the process is necessary in order to discover the truth of the business in this particular case, but because of the importance of rule of law, that justice is a public good, and the faithful have a right to know what is done,
Yeah. Okay.
and that the church, the people have in different states of life in the church have rights that even the Pope, whose power is, supreme, immediate, direct, and absolute, over all the churches, and all the faithful, the
Sure. Okay, fine.
is bound to respect. That said,
Excommunication is, yeah, go ahead.
the issue ought never to have been in doubt. And the idea that we would simply close the books on the guy because the statute of limitation had run out, when it was clear that somehow this guy had evaded through years and decades of higher ups, of his own superiors, either winking at his behavior or else actively working to discredit his accusers.
Yeah.
Right? Should have stopped the clock ticking on that. And in any jurisdiction, in any system of justice, worth half its salt, that would have been seen as something that at the very least would have been taken into consideration. But even before you got there, the reason we have the statutes of limitations is to guarantee the integrity of the process, right? So that the rights of the accused are maintained, so that the guy gets a fair trial. He can basically examine evidence and confront witnesses. In this case, there was mountainous evidence, the Rupnik case. There was mountainous evidence and ample opportunity to confront witnesses. Therefore, there was no reason not to waive the statute of limitations. None.
And so, yeah, so the question of who lifted the excommunication, why, the question of why not laicization, okay, the rule of law, process, trial, okay, but there wasn't one. And all of a sudden now he's incarnated in a diocese and he's a priest in good standing. At least he's a priest somewhere. I don't know how much in good standing, but
the Pope has agreed that is ordered
a new,
CDF or DDF
finally,
now,
but only after articles like
after
the one you published came out.
There was a global
outcry, even amongst the secular press.
Yeah, and even his own people, most of the people in what I described as his army of Renfields.
Great line.
Just couldn't wrap their heads around that one.
Yeah. So yeah, there's going to be a trial, but when, where, and so on. Hey, but look, we should wrap this up. We've been at it for about an hour and 10 minutes. Another lively conversation with the great Dr. Christopher Altieri.
Never a dull moment with you, Larry. Thank you.
Never a dull moment is right. I always love talking and chatting with you. Here's the weird thing before we sign off. I've actually only met you in person once.
I was actually just thinking about that because you recently on the Facebooks posted a picture of you and me and Carrie and Esther out to dinner at I think it was at Taverna Parione, which
it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore.
Right off Piazza Navona.
Yep.
Great little restaurant. I remember it well, and it's one of my fondest memories. It was a great trip to Rome and great meeting, but someday our paths will cross again. Christopher in person, hopefully, and not just via this computer. But I got to run. And do you have any last words though for the audience before I cut this loose?
Yeah, everything's gonna be fine, folks. The bark of Peter will come safely to port.
Yes.
And in the meantime, like I said in my, the very first line of my book that I wrote on reading the news without losing your faith was, if you're not getting paid to read the Vatican pages, stay away from them.
Yeah.
Odd advice for a guy who writes them, right? But
same here. Same
You
here. I've
know,
spent the past year and a half writing on all this stuff.
having said that, grab your popcorn because this is going to be interesting.
That's right. Party on, Garth. Yeah, absolutely. All
Party
right.
on, Wayne.
Thank you. Thank you again. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Until next time. Bye bye.